Looking for something new and exciting to quilt on? How about leather? When you see what Cathy Wiggins does with leather and a long-arm quilting machine, you'll be just as passionate about it as she is. Get ready to be blown away. Cathy, these swatches are so exciting. It makes me want to dive in. But the thing is, this is leather. It's not cotton. I have no idea what to do with it.
I know, there's a lot of leather out there. Think about it, every critter, is leather.
Yeah.
And there's places for every one of these leathers in creating with quilting. But it's difficult to figure out where to start. And
especially if you want to actually quilt it and stitch it.
Because you want to be able to show the texture. That's the whole reason of using quilting, is to be able to show your texture there. And so what I'm going to try to do is simplify that for you.
Great.
And then you can build on top of that, okay? The first key to remember is that leather is bought on a weight. Okay, and so what that means is that when you look at leather, it'll say it's 2.5 ounces, 3.5 ounces, 8 ounces, or whatever. And what that means is how much a square foot of that leather weighs. And if you look at this is tooling leather. Okay, this would not be good to quilt because it's too stiff.
Okay.
But you can see, based on this, you can see the different thicknesses of the leather. And this is about 3 ounces here, and that is about as thick as you're ever going to want to go to be able to quilt on it and still have the texture to show. Okay, and you can go up to like 8. You can go up to 8, 9 ounces is what they use to make belts out of.
That's stiff.
And then you have like 12 ounces what to use for shoe soles. So for quilting, what you want to do, I make it simple for you, is there's 2 different types of leathers that work really well. There's upholstery grade leather, which is what this is. You feel it's a little bit thicker, and it is upholstery grade, so it's made to go on furniture. Okay, but it's still pliable enough for you to be able to get some texture out of it. And this is about 3 ounces. Okay. And then this one, this is a garment grade leather. And see how nice and thin this is?
There's so much drape in here that I can see how this would be a skirt. There's no way. I mean, this would be...
But both. So you have the upholstery grade and this is about 2 ounces. Usually it's about 1.5 to 2 ounces. And the funny thing is, the people always will ask, well, why does it say 1.5 to 2 ounces? Okay, the reason is because when you buy a hide, the thicknesses vary across that hide. And think about it, because where the belly is, where it stretches more, that weight's going to be thinner.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's how you get the 2.5 to 3 ounces. But as long as you stay with garment grade leather or upholstery grade leather, 3 ounces or less, you'll be fine.
Okay, good.
And so that's a place to start. But it still can't be being able to feel it too, to see exactly which ones do work best.
Well, one mystery is solved there.
Yes. Now, one thing I did bring to show you is people ask, well, how do you buy it?
Yeah, it's not yardage.
Right. You purchase leather by the hide. You can buy a whole hide, a half hide, a quarter hide, and some people have pre-cuts too, but the size of it, I brought one to show you so you can get an idea. This is actually, see how big this is.
It's huge.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
This is actually a half a hide, and a half a hide's a cowhide, and a half a hide is going to run you about 22 square feet. So it's huge. It's really big.
And what did this cost you?
A half a hide will run about $170.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's not as expensive as what you can think.
No, especially thinking how much you can use it for, because you're not normally making king-size quilts out of this.
Exactly. A bag, purses, anything like this.
Yep.
Yeah. So so this is the half hide. This is the leather that I carry right here. Is what I have.
Okay.
So this is, as long as you stay with garment grade or upholstery grade, 3 ounces or less, you're going to have the leather. You're going to be successful with it. Okay.
Good.
Now, we've selected the leather. Now, the next question is, how do you get the designs onto the leather? That was a whole other adventure I had to go on because no one does it.
Yeah. So the blue, nothing
worked.
Chalk.
And you can. Some of the chalk pencils are okay, but it drags across the leather, and leather is soft. And because what I found was that everybody that was currently working with leather, whether it be the toolers, leather tooling people, or garment makers, when they mark in leather, they're marking cut lines. And so it was okay for it to stay there. They didn't need something that was going to mark and then go away.
Sure.
And so what I was able to find, believe it or not, they come in all different colors, but I found that the white ones and the silver ones work the best. And these are water soluble, and what these actually are the pens that tattoo artists use to mark the skins before they actually apply a tattoo.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And even with this, though, I highly recommend that you test it out on your leather first. Because if you look at these two leathers, how this one is a little bit more shiny, has a different finish on it, because it's a garment. And so it wants to take more wear and tear, as opposed to this one is more of a naked finish that is made to be able to stress over time. So even the pens may vary on how much they come out from leather to leather, too. So you still want to test it out before you commit.
How do you test it? Do you wash it, or do you?
Well, you can just wipe it off with a damp paper towel.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. And a lot of times too, it may have a little bit of residue there. But if you're marking a quilting line like I do, that it's okay. You're not going to see it anyway.
Okay.
In fact, it may be a little bit darker, but what that does is it actually adds more depth to your quilting anyway. Puts a shadow in there. So if I'm going to trace around an image, this is what I use. Now if I want to do an image like this one, like I have this flower here, this daisy pattern that I want to get onto leather, so I'm actually going to be tracing it onto the leather. That you can't use a light box.
No, you're right.
Right, and so what I found was you can use this paper. This is Cero paper. It's been around for years. Dressmakers have used it forever. And it's a chalk paper, and there's chalk on one side of it. And this also comes in different colors, like blue and yellow, but you don't want to use this because it's got dye. Okay, so that can cause a lot of problems. So I do use the white, and so what I do is I take my pattern like this, and I transfer it. This is a tracing film, and what this does is it allows you to be able to smooth across the leather more smoothly. If you try to so what you're going to do is you're going to layer it. So you're going to put the chalk side down.
Right,
chalk side down.
I think you've made a mistake once or twice before.
Yeah, so you're going to put your chalk side down, and then you're going to put your image on top of it, and then you're going to use a stylus, which is around here somewhere, and just trace over it. Now, if you try to use it on the paper, it's going to tear because it's soft and it'll dig into the leather.
Because you're going into something soft.
Right. And so this is actually transfer film that toolers, that leather tooling people use. So it does glide smoothly over the leather, and this is how I get my images onto the leather.
Where can people get that?
I have it.
Okay, great, great. And we'll give you that at the end of the segment.
You can also use like acetate.
And
vellum is okay, but this is a little bit more sturdy than that is. And so this does, and actually you can use this multiple times too. So I copy on here with a Sharpie, and then I use the Cero paper to get the image onto the leather itself. Great. Okay? So now we have our image onto the leather. And one of the questions I get all the time is, how big a needle do you need to use?
Sure.
Because people have the idea that if you're going to be quilting leather, you have to use a really big needle, and that's not the case. Quilting on leather is no different than quilting on anything else. Your needle size should always match the thread size that you're working with, because what the needle is doing is it's penetrating a hole for that thread to go through.
Sure.
So you always match your needle size with the thread that you're using. Okay, now I do highly recommend using a leather needle, because what a leather needle has is it has a knife point. We're used to using universal needles that have a ball point that is used to going through the fibers of the leather, of fabric. Yep. Whereas a leather needle has a knife point that actually cuts a hole through the leather and so it makes a nice clean hole for the thread to go through.
So it's the opposite thing. We want it to pierce, whereas with fabric we don't.
Because if you use a universal, you may be fine with it, but what can happen is it can cause your thread to shred because it's not a nice clean hole for it to go through.
Right.
And the other thing that I have seen on some leathers, especially with deer hides for some reason, that it can actually cause the hole to tear from hole to hole. If you're using a universal, because it's tearing, that universal needle is tearing a hole through the leather as opposed to cutting it.
Yep.
Okay, so, and I use just regular thread, what I've always used. I tell people, use the thread that your machine likes.
Yep.
I mean, that's it, just using the thread that your machine likes, and I do recommend a leather needle. And the other thing to keep in mind, Leather is a little bit heavier, and so if you really want to show your definitions of your stitches, you're going to want to add, what I do is I always have a layer of 80/20 or something on the bottom, and I always put a layer of wool. A lot of times I just tear pieces to put right behind my image itself.
You don't need the whole piece.
No, you don't. And so, because what that does is, because when I'm doing these, I actually want the emphasis to be on the design itself and not on the background, because I want the background to go away. And so I'll just put the little pieces of leather right behind the image, because the leather needs a little bit more help, because it's a little bit heavier, to make sure it gets that definition in there.
Puff it up.
Yes, and the other thing too is what I think is really cool about leather is that it brings so much to the table to begin with that you don't need to have anything complicated to make it special. And so that's the reason I don't worry about my backgrounds. I just let them disappear and let the image that I have on there shine.
So you keep it simple.
Right, that's my preference. That's what I like to do. Now, the other thing that you got to keep in mind is that leather stretches. And some leathers will stretch more than others. You see how that stretches?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and it's directional because it depends on where it was on the cow, and so or the animal. And so you may not know, if you get a piece of leather, you may not know where it is on there. So you have to keep in mind that it's going to stretch, and the thinner the leather is, the more it's going to stretch.
Yep.
And so. And traditionally, when we're working with a quilt top, what we would do is we'd stitch straight up, straight down, and straight down. I mean, that's how we would stabilize it, and then we'd start quilting it. With leather, what I found works best is I do a serpentine stitch around the edge here, and what that does is it gives me a little bit of room for that leather to maneuver in and not lock it into place. And so it gives a little, so if I'm going to work out some stretch, if it's going to stretch a little bit, it'll have a little bit of room that it can stretch out.
It has some give.
Right.
Yeah.
And so therefore, because of that, I'll start with a piece a little bit larger than I want it to cut down to. So therefore, this piece will be larger, and I'll trim it just enough to trim all of that excess off. Okay?
Okay, thinking ahead.
Yes.
Before you show us this, you need your zinger.
Oh.
And you've been on 3 times.
I have.
Yay!
So I have 3 zingers.
That's right.
Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how we do the zigzag stitch. And the other thing is, once the the serpentine stitch, zigzag, whatever you want to call it, going around the edge, and then you're going to have to actually break up your piece too, so that it's also stabilized. So what you're doing is you're starting to stabilize a large area, and then you're going to stabilize it into smaller areas. You can't, if you just start working and start working out, you're going to wind up with stretch going on.
Okay.
So it's important that you stabilize the whole thing first, and then go back in and do your detail.
These are the things we're glad that you already worked out, so you're telling us.
I learned the hard way.
Yes.
Okay. So here we go, and it's real simple. It's nothing. There's nothing exact about it. You just want to catch it in a few areas just to keep it stable.
And you're not going to see it, so it
No,
doesn't
you're not
matter.
gonna see
Doesn't have
it.
to be pretty.
Right. And normally I would go all the way around.
Yep.
Okay, and then what I would do next, whatever background fill that you're going to do, this particular one, I'm just going to do a straight line for the background fill. Whatever background fill you're going to do is what I'll do is I'll take my background fill and I'll go straight across to my image that I have, that I've put on here with the serial paper. And once I get to my image, then I'll use my image outline, okay, to stabilize some other areas. Okay, and what I'll try to do is I'll actually work my way.
Because you couldn't use basting stitches to stabilize it because the
cannot.
leather would have holes in it.
Right.
So you're using pieces of your stitching.
Right, and so see, I've traced,
design.
right, and I've traced my image over to this side.
And then you can
and
get
I go
over this.
over, okay, and then I'll go up again to right about here. So I'm breaking it up into smaller pieces.
Yep.
And I'll come back over.
So smart.
Yeah, I'll come back over, and again, I'll keep tracing around my little image here. It doesn't have to be exact, because these lines are going to go away.
No one will know.
No one will go away. Yeah, these lines will go away when you get done anyway.
Yeah.
And so I'll go back across, and then I'll go up, and I'll come back across again. And then at that point, you can go back in and fill in your background fill.
Yep. So you've showed us stabilizing it, but also the stitching process.
Right, exactly. Now, this is great for when you have a section that's small enough to go onto your throat space of your long arm. Now, there's other tricks that you have to keep in mind when you're going to do something that's a lot larger.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Yeah, because you can't just put it on the machine as you normally would a quilt.
Right. You have to float the top, and so I have some step outs that we can bring in to show you how to do that.
Wow, this is our finished piece.
It is, and you see, it's very simple design. It's is quilted in a contrasting thread, just done in a dark brown, and so it brings a lot of character and almost like an old-fashioned type feel to it. And it's also got a little binding, a little piping in it.
That pulls it all together.
Right.
And how do you do the binding?
It's great because it's glued on. You don't
No
have
stitching?
No stitching. For the piping, I just cut about an inch thick and then just an inch wide and glued that into place. And then I cut the binding a little bit wider and glued that into place. And so you see it on the back how it's glued on into place.
Aha.
The other problem that we ran into was how we were going to put sleeves on them because you can't do it's difficult to really to stitch in the traditional sleeve. And actually my daughter Olivia was the one that came up with doing just gluing loops on the back for the hanging sleeve on them. So this is what the finished piece looks like.
Great. And you've just used cotton. The backing is just cotton.
Backing is just cotton, yes, that's true. Yeah, backing is just cotton. Now sometimes on the larger pieces I may use a home deck fabric on the back because it needs to have a little bit more stability.
Okay.
Especially if you've got ones that have got raw edges on them because they have a tendency to curl because it'll pick up the moisture from the air. So I will use those. But any cotton backing would be just fine. Yep. Now this is when look at this one. See that it opens up a whole new world of dyes, you know, enhancements that you can do with leather because now you're introduced to a whole what leather workers use too, as also brings into play. This is an example of one that was quilted on this same leather, and then I used dyes to enhance it afterwards. And I've got some step outs here to show you how I had to stabilize it in order to make sure that I didn't get any stretching going on.
And this is hand?
Yes, this is all hand. You had to hand punch it first. With the punch, and then just feed the rawhide through there. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So
it's incredible.
Yeah. So see, this is where she is.
Same leather.
So, yeah. So see this one. If you look at this one, and then the rest of the step outs about the same. This is the first roll. Right, this is what you can see on your first pass through, right? And so before you advance it the first time, right? And so you see a serpentine stitched just around the part that my machine would reach, and I did very basic stabilization where I used my stitching and then to stitch across the design over to the other side. Yep. Okay, and then once I get that stabilized, then I roll it. Advance the quilt, and so I'm able to actually go ahead and you see how I've spaced it out all the way down.
Try to be even.
Right, and then when for this one, I've already gotten all the way down, and I'm coming back up, and I'm going to start doing some more work.
Fill in.
But see, but this is how you stabilize it, and so therefore, when you start filling in your background field, your dense quilting, it won't stretch as much.
So do you do that again? Do you move it several times?
I usually, if you get it good and stabilize the first pass, you can usually start back at the bottom and work up and do the rest of it. Usually you can do it in 2 passes as long as you get it nice and stabilized on your first through.
Okay, these are such amazing tips.
And here's what she looks like. And I was testing out some dyes. That's what she looks like before the dye.
Yeah. When you test your dyes, you've gotten this far. Do you do little samples and test them first?
Yes, I do all, and we'll have a whole session, right? And next time we'll talk about dyes.
Next segment. Okay,
but
great.
Yes, I do a lot of testing on dyes, and I have a whole library that I have on that.
I bet you do. Yeah.
So this one,
a horse.
Yeah, this one is actually done on.
Let's get a good look at this.
I love using hides that have raw edges.
Yeah.
And this is actually deer hide. It's a whole deer skin.
It's very soft.
Yes, but it's tough.
Oh.
It's interesting with deer hides. One tip is if you are using, when you're quilting with leather, even if you're using a leather needle, your thread may start to shred. And what that means is that your hole is not quite big enough for your thread to go through. Just go up a size needle.
Okay.
Okay, and you will see that, especially with deer hides that are a little bit denser for some reason, that you may have to do that. Okay. But this is a whole deer hide. And I use the whole thing, but one thing I want to show you is the binding on the back of this. You see?
Oh.
Once it's quilted,
right.
I cut away all the extra stuff, and then I just glued pieces of leather just to make it nice and clean on the back.
So it's finished on the back.
Now, because this one is done a little bit differently because you're not going out to the edges like we were with the other one.
Right.
Okay, so what this one is, the way this one is, because you want your edges to be raw and filled and have a lot of movement anyway, you start in the middle and you work out.
Because you can't go around and stabilize the edges.
Because you want to keep those raw. So you start in the middle and work out. And what that does, if there's any stretch that's going to happen,
it's going
to go out to the outside. And so you just start in the middle and you work out. And you just, and then this is that was the first roll, right? And so your second roll, right? I've done the bottom part of the horse, and you just keep working your way down.
And whatever goes out is fine because you're just smushing it as you go.
Exactly right. And saying this is again, this is when it's finished. And some of these will have, this one does, some of them will have, you know, these are natural occurring hides, and some of them are going to have holes. They're going to have imperfections. You're going to have holes in some, you're going to have brands in some, so don't be afraid of that.
Embrace it.
Embrace it and incorporate it in part of your design.
Oh, wonderful.
So that's how you handle those, the different ones if you're going to roll, when you have to advance it.
Okay, okay. Do you have a couple of real quick other things to show us?
I do.
Wow, Cathy, when I held those swatches in my hand, this is what I was talking about. Now you've given us the basics, we know what to do, but now here's the possibilities.
Yeah, it's just a couple of quick things. This one is incorporating, it's just a basic quilted background.
Yep.
And with scraps on top that I actually ran through my go cutter to get the images and then just glued them right on top of my background.
So all you need to be able to do is do some straight quilting.
Exactly.
Done.
And this one has incorporated some of the fancier.
Oh, yeah.
This is actually rattlesnake. And this is hair on hide.
Oh my gosh.
And then, of course, not everything has to be cowboy,
Yeah.
right? I love doing dragons and stuff too.
Cathy, dragons,
I know, right? And then this is when you can start bringing in your hardware.
And again, it's simple.
Right. And like the one behind me here
Hardware.
that actually has all kinds of Western hardware on it that you can bring in as well.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Yeah. So really what I've got out of this is the absolute basics, but you make it easy because you supply kits and everything on your site. You have classes, everything else. So it's like you've gone through all of this, figuring this out, and now you're making it easy for people to get started, to spread your passion for quilting.
That's right.
So we have another episode with you, and what are you going to be showing us?
It's called, we'll talk about dyes.
Yeah.
And it's what I've termed as thread tooling. It's creating the illusion of tooled leather with quilting and dye.